Speaker, a CBC article I tabled today said, and I quote, "Children are still living in the former foster home where Serenity lived before she died, emaciated and battered in an Edmonton hospital bed," unquote. When I read this, I thought the minister and the system cannot possibly be that tone-deaf and indifferent to children in care, and yet it is true. To the children's minister, what could possibly have been more important that you couldn't be bothered to ensure kids in the same place where the brutal end to Serenity's young life took place are left to suffer the same fate under your watch?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, once again, I cannot state strongly enough that the safety of the children of this province is absolutely my key priority, and I will continue to do everything in my power to ensure children in this province are safe. I want to be clear that there are no children in the care of this government who have been placed in this home. And again, ministry officials continue to monitor the situation in the home very closely. But Mr. Speaker, if there is an allegation of abuse or neglect, Children's Services staff will follow up. They will do a safety assessment in that house, and Mr. Speaker, and will.
The first supplementary.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I was once a minister, so I know that things can go sideways without warning and land on the front page of the paper. I also know when this happens, the ministers in charge must demand the file and take a personal interest on the issue and get on top of the problem or be fired.
That's right.
Serenity's file has been front and center for months, and now we know the Premier and Minister have not done their job and left more kids in the same danger as Serenity. To the Premier, before you and your minister resign in disgrace, will you order these kids removed from the very same house that led to the unspeakable abuse and death that Serenity suffered? Don't laugh. Not funny, Premier.
Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's interesting, Mr. Speaker, because unfortunately the tragedy that Serenity went through occurred in September of 2014. And the ministry engaged in a very comprehensive review and monitoring of the safety of the biological children of the guardians in question, beginning in September of 2014 onward, under the watch of the member opposite's former government. Now, the reason for that, Mr. Speaker, is because the policy is that you do not take away the children of somebody who is engaged in a criminal investigation.
Thank you, Honourable Premier. Thank you, Honourable Premier. Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Premier. Second supplementary question.
Shame on the Premier smirking about this issue. Mr. Speaker, we know the Premier and the Children's Minister have left children under the same roof where a child named Serenity was starved, beaten, raped, and murdered, knowing that her killers are still at large. To any minister that dares to answer, what feeble excuse can you offer that would convince Albertans that the Premier and Minister should not be fired and immediately held responsible for endangering the lives of these and other children?
Honourable members, I would ask that responses I am not able to hear when the noise gets so loud, so please contain your comments both in substance as well as tone. Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, certainly I have to say that without doubt I take an interest in the safety and well-being of every child in this province. And Mr. Speaker, I can absolutely say that in this particular case, that ministry officials and Children's Services are monitoring the situation very closely. Since 2014, they did recognize that the need for an interest. And Mr. Speaker, I care very deeply about ensuring that every child is safe and protected, and I will continue to do every single thing I can to improve the child intervention system and
Thank you, Honourable Minister.